Hi, everyone. We want to thank you so much for taking time today to participate in the webinar. We truly hope that you get some very good tips and tricks out of it. And well, we've got some wonderful panelists who are joining us today who are going to share some of the challenges they faced and how they were able to find solutions and get the finances in order at their churches. So I'm going to start by introducing who we have with us today. So,
Karen, can I do the introduction?
Sure, you can.
To the welcome.
Sure.
You're still on top of things. You're just jumping right in. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Peggy Lowe. I'm the Vice President of the Board for the Episcopal Parish Network. And I want to thank you for being with us today. We're grateful to partner with Chazen and Company to offer this webinar on managed accounting and finance services, a tool that will help us both improve the financial information we have and allow us to focus more of our time and energy on mission. Karen, handing it back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I apologize for that. As Peggy mentioned, we are with Chazen and Company. My name is Karen Sprague, and I'm the Director of Business Development. And we have Martha Healsbeck with us, who is also with Chazen and Company. She has worked as a CFO level accountant for the company and is now working in the talent and recruitment management department. We also have two guests with us who we are thankful were willing to step up and do this with us today. One is Abigail Gorman, who is the senior warden at St. Columba's Episcopal Church. And we have Chris Chaconis, who is the treasurer with St. Sophia Cathedral. So without further ado, one quick thing for housekeeping, just we do encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. Depending on the question, we may answer it right at the time that it is submitted, or we may wait until the end. So please hang in tight. We will answer as many questions as we can. And we are going to start with Abigail, who's going to talk a little bit, and then Chris, who's also going to share his story. And then we'll lead into a PowerPoint presentation, and I'll answer a question that you will all have, and that is that yes, we will email it out to you after the presentation, so you will all have it available to you. So with that, Abigail, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Peggy. Thanks, Karen and Chazen and Company and the Episcopal Parish Network. I'm thrilled to be with all of you today. As Karen said, my name is Abigail Gorman. I'm the senior warden at St. Columba's, and my day job is I've been a nonprofit executive for many years, shall we say. And the first thing that I want to say, I'm going to share a little bit, Chris and I are going to share our experiences as volunteer leaders, and then as Karen said. So I'll just spend a few minutes describing at a high level, and hopefully it'll just prompt some questions. And the first thing I would say is I don't think there's any problem that any one of us has faced that someone else hasn't. And that's why we're here today, to share our the challenges that we've overcome and our lessons learned, and the support we've gotten over the years from accounting firms that have really helped us to focus on our mission. So if you've got some challenges out there, you are not alone. Managing the finances of a church can often be a challenge. Because our goal, of course, is to maximize resources in the nonprofit world and in the Episcopal Church world as well. You want to maximize the resources for the mission. You're not really thinking about accounting and finance. And I think oftentimes administrative functions tend to be under-resourced. And as a result, sometimes challenges can snowball. I think there's also, as we know, there's diffuse leadership structures in the church at times. I think institutional knowledge tends to get passed from one person to another. So a lot of these challenges are not uncommon. And I have both at St. Columba's, which is in Washington, D.C. It is a fairly large parish, but I think there are parallels for any size parish. And I certainly have seen accounting challenges in, as I said, as a lay leader at St. Columba's, significant ones that we've overcome, I'm happy to say, and then in other types of nonprofits. So these are not always unique to Episcopal parishes by any stretch. I have, I think, really benefited in 4 different organizations, nonprofit organizations, from using outsourced accounting services for any number of kinds, from special projects to actually performing the accounting function, to helping prep for annual audits, as well as like special projects like setting up accounting procedures. And I think, so there's a number of different ways to think about using these services. And one, this wasn't an Episcopal church, but it is, when I was the director of finance too many decades ago that I'd like to say, in my first nonprofit organization, the previous director of finance used paper ledgers. And so we had, yes, Chris is getting a kick out of that. I'm sure many of you are. So we had to convert it to software and set up best practices. We were starting essentially from ground zero. So there's always another story out there. And fortunately, I imagine that none of us are facing that same kind of thing now, but we hired an accounting firm to help us convert at that point. And it really allowed me to focus on other needs at the time, which is what all of us want to do. If whether or not you're a staff person at an Episcopal church or you're a lay leader, there are many other things that we really need to focus on, not whether or not the puts and takes or the accounting T-charts are in the right shape. You can tell that I know something about finance, but I am not a CPA. And so at St. Columba's, we were in a situation where it had been many years since we had regular financial reporting on a monthly or quarterly basis, and we hadn't completed annual audits in many years. And the organization was going through leadership transitions, and so there were bigger fish to fry than really focusing deeply on fixing the accounting challenges. We were in the midst of an interim period with the rector, and so the church and the vestry needed to focus on other things. And while the staff made a huge effort to get caught up on financial reporting and audits, it's really hard, as you all know, to focus on doing your full-time job as well as take on a big special project such as catching up on audits, whether or not it's a formal audit or annual financial reviews. And we found that it was just really too much for the accounting, for the director of operations, essentially at St. Columba's, and any of the other staff to participate and make a dent in the years of accounting and financial records that needed to be caught up with. And so, and we were experiencing, the vestry was upset about this. Obviously, everyone wanted this to, this wasn't good for in terms of stewardship. It wasn't good for credibility or transparency. The vestry was concerned about our fiduciary responsibilities. And I think after a really valiant effort by staff to try to get caught up, and so it wasn't, we weren't experiencing anything untoward or fraud or anything like that. It was just capacity and capability. And but we were experiencing concerns, and this was also coming at a time where we're coming out of the Great Recession, where the parish was asking a lot of questions and expected more of the organization in terms of financial transparency. And so having worked with several accounting firms in my career and having experience working with Chazen in another kind of organization, frankly, Chazen was really helpful to us, and we brought them in to get us caught up on these years of not being able to produce financial statements and annual audits. I'm not going to go into all the detail. We can say more about that. But we hired Chazen to bring them in to prepare for the audit, recreate financial records, and establish good accounting practices and produce reports. And with their help, we were able to complete 5 years of audits, have a conclusive set of financial reports, clean audit opinions, which was not clear that we were going to be in that position to be able to do it, establish procedures, and then transferred a lot of the accounting responsibility back to the staff. So we were able to rebalance where the best expertise was placed in terms of who was doing what, which I think was really helpful. And we've since then been able to maintain consistent financial reporting, and we've been able to produce an annual audit every year. And I think what managed accounting services allows staff to do is to focus on the primary responsibility of running the church, and most importantly, building trust in the organization from the parish and the stakeholders, essentially. And so one thing I would say, and I'll turn it over to Chris, or Karen, back to you, and then to Chris, is I've run through a timeline fairly quickly, but I'm happy to answer questions about how we handled this. But I would say, even though St. Columba's is a fairly large parish, I think managed accounting can really help with either, as I said, a specific getting the organization established in a good financial framework. And if you don't do an annual audit, if you're not large enough to need to do an annual audit, can help with prepping for a financial review. And I would say, if you're thinking about doing this, start with a specific project that will help staff capacity and staff to be more efficient. Because I think that's ultimately what you're trying to do, is bring in the expertise rather than trying to build it yourself in accounting, and allow your wonderful staff or your volunteers, if you're fully volunteer run, to focus on what they do best. So I hope that was helpful. And Karen, I'll turn it back to you, and happy to answer any questions about my experience, get a little deeper as we go.
Thank you, Abigail. Another friendly reminder, if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them in the Q&A, and we will get to those. And now I'm going to give the floor to Chris.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Abigail. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Chaconis, and in my volunteer life, I'm the treasurer for St. Sophia Cathedral, Greek Orthodox Cathedral, in Washington, D.C. as well, down the street a little bit from St. Columba's. So we don't have a vestry, but we have a parish council or a board of trustees to the outside world, but we call it parish council. I was first elected, my first term was in 2014, so I joined the board then. In my professional life, you can all see it in the background, I'm the Cfo of Jbs International. We're a mid-tier government contractor located in Rockville, Maryland, North Bethesda, Maryland, and I've been involved in finance and accounting for most of my career, which is also multi-decades, including about 35 years in accounting operations. So in 2014, just to give you a couple of stats, I think in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, we are one of the larger communities. We're the 7th oldest community in the United States. We're the first one not named Holy Trinity or Annunciation. We are, as I mentioned to Karen previously, we are not named for St. Sophia, she of the three daughters, faith, hope, and charity, but for the Holy Wisdom, the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, as we refer to it. So anyway, and the legacy tie-in for me is both my grandfathers and a great uncle were charter members the first 9 people to sign the incorporation of the church in 1909, I believe, even though the community started in 1904. Both grandfathers and a couple of great uncles signed on to that. So I feel like the church belongs to me. No, just kidding. Anyway, so that's my involvement there. When I joined in 2014, first thing that happened was we started to have some turnover in the office. We had a cathedral administrator who was handling both the QuickBooks, the input, and trying to run the operation of the church. There was some turnover there. We decided the board decided to redefine the roles. We created a new role of a financial administrator to kind of separate that, because the operation, as I'm sure a lot of you on the line know, the effort it takes to manage a church, especially when our size, we have mid to high 700s number of stewards, so quite a big congregation. We added a financial administrator. I raised the possibility at that time of I was the first one, the heretic in the room. Well, should we think about outsourcing? Maybe this is a good. Oh, no. Okay. So we went through recruiting and advertising, recruiting, and we hired an accountant who was proficient in QuickBooks. So fast forward, and that was working okay, but fast forward to April 2020. Okay, the state of emergency was declared March 13th. March 15th was our last in-person service that Sunday, and then we were closed to the public. And then having to follow the 4 pages of protocols from the DC government on what we could do and couldn't do, and so forth. So we pivoted to being a virtual church, which meant investments in streaming and cabling and whatever streaming infrastructure there is, servers, base stations, the whole deal, cameras. We did that rather quickly in about 3 weeks. And we met late March. Our parish council meets the 3rd Thursday of every month, which is coming up this Thursday. And we met, and I mean, who knew what was going to happen? None of us knew what was going to happen. And with the church closed and our big source of funds, people come to church, they also make donations. It was like staring into the COVID abyss. What's going to happen? So we hunkered down. Our accountant worked virtually. I mean, we figured out what to do. However, over the summer we noticed, and by September certainly, I'm privileged to have a very seasoned assistant treasurer as well, who was in the business world, and she and I both realized that this really isn't a full-time position, and maybe we need to think about restructuring this, saving the church some money along the way, because we don't know how things are going to turn out in this new virtual world that we're in, where no one's coming to church, but we got to figure this out. So it was kind of a scary time, and as I'm sure a lot of people on the line had that same experience. It was certainly a scary time. So we restructured the role from full-time to part-time. I felt pretty good about this because, again, 35 years in accounting operations, kind of have a good feel for what the volumes are and what it takes to keep somebody busy 8 hours a day. So I raised it again. We should think about outsourcing. The council was still uncomfortable with that concept. So what we said was, okay, before the transition, after we let the financial administrator separated, because that's the right word. After he separated, I had a Robert Half, and this is not a plug for him. We have there's nothing wrong with that. We had a Robert Half temp be able to step in on day one. We had some nonprofit and church experience in QuickBooks. So he was able to step in, and that kind of kept the wheels going for a while. He got us caught up, and okay. But, part-time positions are hard to fill, especially now. They're hard to fill. And because people want full-time work, they're not really cobbling together, 2 or 3 part-time jobs. So God bless him, he accepted a full-time position with another employer. We had somebody step in, one of our language school teachers, who had a background in QuickBooks and bookkeeping, stepped in during that time. But guess what? She eventually accepted a full-time position. So now we've got with less than a year, just about a year, whatever. In about 10 months, we have 3 people with turning over in the books. So I think by then, because recruiting a part-time resource proved difficult and time-consuming, the time was right for the council to consider outsourcing. So this time, I won. Well, I won in the sense that they were open to the concept. They were open to the concept. Now, back in 2014, Adele Chazen of Chazen and Company had a conversation with me about, hey, Chris, have you considered outsourcing? And yes, I'm on board. I get it, but there's not a lot of support for that with the other 13 members of the council. So, but she stayed on my radar all these years. Okay. So when the time came and we knew we were going to make this change, I reached out and asked for a proposal. We also at the same time had a solo practitioner CPA who bid on the business, who was focused, who was also just did church, just focused on doing accounting or bookkeeping for churches. And while his rate was very competitive, I won't kid you, we thought, I was able to convince everyone when they thought about it, it's risky. The guy's 1 deep. He's 1 deep. What happens if? And does he really have the capabilities and so forth? So we all felt that, yes, that was too risky. Even though he's a competent guy, nothing against him, but that was really too risky on behalf of the church. And so we went ahead and engaged Chazen. And it's been, so this was, I want to say September of last year, if I recall correctly. I think might have been the first month they closed the books anyway, was last year. It's been a positive experience for many reasons. One is now we have access to an accounting professional. We have somebody assigned to us. So it's always the same person every month who's assigned to us, who's well-versed in church operations, understands our language, even though she doesn't do too many, well, probably her only Greek Orthodox church, but that's okay. She gets it, she understands. Plus there's oversight, okay? There's somebody above, again, back to the solo guy. There's oversight, there's quality control. I mean, these are things I think of value that are important, that bring value to our operations. So back in the day when I worked for a manufacturing company, back in the late 90s, an international Fortune 50 company, Alcatel, I was in the corporate purchasing department. We used to say, we used to talk about core competencies. Is that a core competency? One example is we were, in another life, I worked at Nextel as a consultant in supply chain. And I go out to Sprint, who had just bought Nextel. And they have a beautiful campus in Overland Park, Kansas. I loved it out there. Turns out the groundskeepers, the landscapers were all Sprint employees. It's like, well, are you a telecom company? I mean, is that really a core competency? Are you a telecom company or not? Why are you hiring landscape people and managing that workforce? Doesn't make any sense. Anyway, sorry if anybody works at Sprint, but that was my impression back then. So, I use that analogy. That's the, it's not a core competency. In the process, we were able to do account reconciliations and get up to date. There had been all that turnover, and they were able to also bring some technology solutions that really helped us. And last thing, always conscious of this as the treasurer, we've lowered our cost from the full-time model and save approximately between $35,000 and $40,000 a year. That's year over year. That helps a lot. So that's our story.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you. I want to take the time really quickly to pose one of the questions that has come in. The question is, I am the volunteer treasurer bookkeeper at my church. Our finances are in good order and we are consistently ready for our annual audit. So kudos to you for that. I gave 2 years notice to end my term a while back and intend to leave in 2023, early part of 2023. So far, no one has come forward to take the job. I think we're looking for bookkeeping service and I'm wondering how to do that and what it would look like. It's easy to imagine outsourcing payroll and check writing, but hard to imagine how to outsource all of the fund accounting and reports the treasurer is responsible for. So just so that you're aware that those are services that we can provide. We are able to do that. I will give you full disclosure. I was the director of finance and administration at St. Columba's and worked closely with Martha, and Martha was able to create reports for me that I would be able to pull and that I can then produce for the vestry board, whoever, whatever denomination you are, for those that need to and manage the oversight, make sure the fund management and accounting is done correctly. Donors' intent and wishes are honored, and that there's a historical, process for understanding the gift, and so that knowledge does not go away. We will address some of the other questions kind of embedded in there, but that's just to give you a high-level answer for that. At this point, I'm going to move on and have Martha and I begin with our PowerPoint, and we really felt it would be really important to cover 3 topics that we have listened to many churches, and these seem to be the challenges. One is controls, ensuring internal controls are in place. Reports, making sure that you are producing the correct reports and that the correct people are receiving the types of reports they should be receiving based on their role at the church. And donor fund management. Again, that goes back to what I just mentioned about making sure that all those funds are where they're supposed to be and they're reconciled and everyone knows what, the status of them, what's in them, et cetera, and that donor wishes are being honored. So I'm going to start right off with this slide right here and say that churches, parishes, congregations, whatever denomination you are on the call, you should have some specific goals. One, I would assume, is that you will have a healthy parish and congregation financially, and that way you are able to deliver on your mission. So, we understand that your mission is not to manage finances, but it is your responsibility to have the oversight of them. We want to ensure that you have proper controls over the assets that you have been given, and that your accounting file, whether it be QuickBooks Online, QuickBooks Desktop, ACS On Demand, whatever the product might be that you're using, that the file is of very high integrity and produces the information, reports, et cetera, that you need. And the key is to be able to produce that data and have visibility and clarity for your donors in order to be able to increase your donor trust and hopefully the giving as a result. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Martha to talk a little bit about controls.
Okay, hi everyone. There's a definitional slide here about what an internal control framework is. Notice that it's not, the use of the term fraud doesn't show up anywhere here. This is really about protecting the assets and also bringing credibility and demonstrating sound financial management to all of your donors. So the focus is really on providing information that the donors need, that they can be assured that things are going well, and also that the assets are being protected, because those are assets that are typically passed from your members to you for management. You can talk a little bit about what internal controls look like. A number of you may be coming from small environments, and even when we go back to St. Columba, where Karen and Abigail and I all started together on this, there is a large parish, but they had a small team of people. So one of the things we always talk about is, how do we have enough people to properly segregate duties so that the same person isn't opening the mail, taking out the cash, recording how much cash was received and all of that, because that's obviously a place where you can have trouble with error. So one of the things that we worked hard on, and we do this with all of our clients, is how do we utilize a team approach in order to have strong internal controls? So we mentioned some ideas here. Can you use volunteers to do a piece of this? We often see this when we talk about, counting what comes in the basket that's passed during the service. And the point there is that's often done by volunteers, but it's important that the volunteers understand their responsibility and they understand the process. So documentation is really important there, and also giving them the tools to do it easily, so you're not literally taking what you see on the backs or the fronts of envelopes and trying to reconcile that. There's also the opportunity to use a non-financial staff person to do a piece of this work. So if you have a administrative person or even a plant person who's in the building regularly, they can do a small piece of this so that there's a separation between what comes in the front door and what's actually recorded in the system. Many congregations of all different sizes are going to online giving, and there's built-in controls in most online giving systems so that the cash never passes through the hands of anyone on the team, and it also is automatically recorded and batched and can be put into the accounting system and the accounting records. So that's another possibility. And then lastly, we've talked a lot about how do you utilize outside accounting or bookkeeping resources in order to make sure that you have the proper separation of duties and good control over the assets.
Sorry, I muted myself. Thank you, Martha. I appreciate that. Next, we're going to go and talk a little bit about reports. As you've heard, I think all of us mentioned that financial transparency is key. You want to have both the trust of your vestry or governing body, as well as your parishioners or your members in order to continue to increase giving so that the mission of the church can be carried out. So as you think about reporting, it's key to understand who needs to understand and receive these financial reports and how often. So as you look at ministry leaders or directors of ministries or managers or whatever they're called at your particular church, and any volunteers, because I know a lot of, for example, in the Episcopal Church, you might have the Flower Guild and it's led by a group of volunteers, and there's a leader for that group. And you want to be in touch with them at least monthly to let them know how their certain ministry area is financially coming along. And they might require you to provide them information more frequently if they're planning to perhaps, for example, in a post-COVID time, they had planned a budget with maybe one youth outing, and now they want to introduce a second one, for example, and they just want to make sure that they have the funds available to do that. So in order for the ministry to be able to make some informed decisions, they're going to have to be able to have access to the financial information for their specific area. The other one is finance committee, and I understand not all churches are, large enough to have both a vestry or governing body and a finance committee. But if you do have a finance committee, then you want them to at least review the reports monthly. If you have a vestry with a finance committee, then the vestry, if they have delegated this financial, the fiscal responsibility to the finance committee, then it's okay for them to receive quarterly reports. Again, if no finance committee is in place, then you would want the vestry or governing board to receive those monthly. I know in the Episcopal Church, it's pretty customary to have an annual meeting, and in that annual meeting, the parish and the congregation would receive financial reports. And finally, a diocese, I'm trying to think, a charge conference, whatever it might be, depending on the denomination, that governing body usually requires some sort of annual report. For example, in the Episcopal Church, it's the parochial report. So that's the different reporting, and that's how we would recommend that you report to the different bodies. Let me find my cursor here. For the summary of your reporting, so it's key to know who you're presenting the reports to, how much information do they need? If I'm running the youth ministry, I probably want more of a line by line detail report so that I know how I am going, towards budget. And if I'm exceeding in another area, if I'm going to go not spend as much money in another, then I can use those funds to cover the area that I plan to exceed in. And for those on vestry or finance committee, they probably don't need every single line. They need categories, maybe plant, utilities, maintenance agreements, et cetera, versus, air conditioning, heating, water, et cetera. And then finally, for the congregation, it's at a much higher level, just so that they can receive the information that they need to get a general idea of how the church is functioning. So I think I've kind of done all of this also. So sorry, I went too fast. So I will now pass it on to Martha to talk about some managing the donor funds.
I think the question came up from one of you about how do you manage all the restricted funds and things like that within this context. Just to step back and just, definitionally, there's only two things you can have. You can have something that's been restricted by the donor, or you can have something that's unrestricted, meaning for general usage. Typically, annual pledge funds are not restricted. They're for the general operation of the church, and the only thing that restricts them is sometimes over time. You don't have the money all at the beginning, but otherwise those are considered general usage funds and are not restricted. There is a way for the board to step in, and designate certain unrestricted funds to be used only for a certain purpose. We see this a lot, and we see it in very small amounts. So just a tip or a trick is, as boards and as your boards do this, if you can resist the designation process as much as possible and still maintain the trust of your congregation, board designated funds tend to get out of hand. Boards change. The intention around the designations goes often with the board that designated those funds, and then you're stuck with these numbers, these often small numbers. What do we do with these funds? What's the intention? A board can undesignate funds as easily as they can designate funds, but I think a lot of times successor boards do not feel comfortable undesignating funds, and so sometimes you have they're sort of hanging around and you don't know exactly what to do with them. I would recommend a process of at least an annual review of those designations to determine whether the purpose still exists. You see this happen a lot around a certain particular kind of crisis, either within the congregation or within the world, where they will, the board will say, I think we want to set aside a certain amount of money this year to do X. But again, that doesn't come from the donor. This comes from the board itself saying this. So just keep those under review and on a very regular basis. Endowments can be really tricky, and if you're in a position, a lot of you will already have an endowment, but it's really important with endowments that there be good written policy about how to handle revenue that comes in on the endowments, how to handle endowments that in low times of market go underwater. But it's, endowment, this is serious business when you have an endowment, and you have to, again, it's important to make sure that you have everything written down so that you can, point to that when there's any question about what's going on with an endowment or how an endowment is used. We would highly recommend a gift acceptance policy in any congregation. With a gift acceptance policy, you can, set a limit of, what gift can determine a new restricted fund. And often these policies can point towards general restricted funds that are already in existence in the church. and away from a few $100s given for a very particular restriction. Because once a donor tells you what you're allowed to do with their money, it's your responsibility to do exactly that with the money and be able to report back that you did that. And if you're audited, you'll be asked, how you're handling these restricted funds. Therefore, if you can eliminate small restricted funds through your donor acceptance, your gift acceptance policy, that's something that we would highly recommend. And those can be fairly simply written by boards. They don't necessarily need, a lot of professional input or something like that. But the idea is to have something so that you can hand it to a donor when they decide they want to give you something. Capital campaigns, much bigger deal, because then, you're typically over time, and they're very specific as to their use. And if you're audited and you have a capital campaign, there will be some pretty careful review of how things were spent, when they were spent, and all of that. But any congregation of any size who's running a capital campaign, they want to make sure that they can see where the money went and that it went to the appropriate place. So these are things that donor restrictions are things that you can't really mess around with, no matter how small your team is. So you want to limit them as much as you can. And once you have them, just make sure that you have documentation so that you, as an administrator, ministry, or a volunteer, can, in your heart and in all of your reporting, show everyone that you're managing to your restrictions.
Thank you, Martha. I want to touch on one point from the reporting. One of the things you might consider when putting together a financial report is maybe doing graphs and charts to show, a bar graph with the plant expenses, the ministry expenses, et cetera, excuse me. And then a line showing what the actual, what the budget is, and then they can visually see, because we know that not everyone that serves on the vestry or on a governing board type position is, really gets excited about looking at detailed financial reports with all these numbers on a page. So just something to keep in mind. So we've shared with you how to, 3 different areas for you to think about. And so the big question that you're thinking now is, how in the world do I implement any of this? So one of them is, consider looking at your internal staff and seeing if there's any realignment of staff possibilities. Of course, not all of you have a large number of staff, and we understand that. Looking at your volunteer base and seeing if there's any volunteers that you can utilize that might have a skill set that would be in line with any of these areas. A key is to make sure that this is kind of the 3rd and 4th point together, ensuring that there is redundancy and institutional knowledge, and making sure that you're documenting everything, so that when the rector, who was friends with parishioner A that gave this money, and the rector knows all the story but no one else does, that needs to be documented somewhere. And now we're in the world of cloud saving material, ways to save materials in a way that people can access them. So I would highly recommend doing small narratives for anything in your reporting so that there's access to that. Another is to ensure that you're creating or updating your policies and procedures. And updating is key, because, a lot of us feel like, yay, we have them in place, we're so good. And then we start doing things totally different than what our policies and procedures say. We're not following the way we initially wrote them. So being conscientious of continuously reviewing them annually is very, very important. The last 2 points, these are services that we provide if that's something of interest to anyone. We did that at St. Columba's, is to be able to come in and did an assessment, reviewed, what job everyone is doing, what are the various tasks that are getting done, what are the softwares that are being used, and are there more efficient ways of doing it? And so we come back with recommendations, estimated costs, et cetera, for you to think about. And then finally, we also can provide finance and accounting services if you decide to go the outsource model. So if we talk about outsourcing, and I will get to all your questions as soon as I finish this section, but some of the benefits of outsourcing is that you would be engaging with a firm that has expertise in nonprofit accounting, as a lot of you have probably discovered. You may have fallen into your position as a parish administrator, and the next thing you know, now you're doing accounting work and you've never been taught how to do nonprofit accounting. It's kind of learned it along the way. Another thing is to be able to save money. You know, the church can save funds without having to hire people with that level of expertise, which allows you then to use those funds for mission-driven initiatives. By having an outside firm, you can also keep that institutional knowledge that we're talking about. We would know the historical knowledge, we would keep all the records of that, and then that way that information is there, and we're not, you know, when you look at your funds at the end of the year and the person who was managing them is no longer there, now you all have to figure out what all these various donors wanted with those funds. So it helps with that. We also have the ability to provide you with technology resources that would help you be able to be more efficient and, again, reduce probably manpower time. And finally, you get transparency because of the ability, the knowledge, the expertise to be able to track and report the gifts and ensure that the wishes of each donor is being honored. There's financial transparency, oversight, and, you know, the key in a church is to ensure that your donors have your trust and they know that you are being good stewards with the resources they are providing. And in order to do that, you have to be able to be transparent, provide reports, and get the information to them that they are asking for and that they deserve to see from you. So just a little bit about us. We were established in 2006 in the DC metro area by Adele Chazen, and she is still the CEO, president, principal of our company. We have just over 140 nonprofit clients. We have a number of churches, and we are able to provide help. I know some of you put in the Q&A, you know, for small, how does this work? What kind of costs are we looking at? We're able to find solutions in order to be able to meet your budget needs. So we can do everything from, you know, low level bookkeeping type accounting work all the way to CFO and everything in between. And we can provide monthly services, or if you have people in-house that are able to do some things, then we can look over their shoulder quarterly for a couple hours a quarter, review the work that they've done, help you produce quarterly financial statements. So we can do pretty much anything in order to make it an affordable and viable option for you. All of our work is done virtually. So as part of our onboarding process, we do get you efficiencies. We put efficiencies in place in order to get you to be in a virtual space. A lot of you have probably tried to figure that out or were forced to figure that out during COVID, but you know, we provide you with some tools and some things to be able to do that. So we always say the Chazen way, we are nonprofit experts. All we do is nonprofit accounting day in and day out. We customize our services. As I said, we can do everything from low level accounting to CFO and everything in between. And we're accessible to you every single day of the every single working day of the year. I apologize. And so, you know, whether it be text, phone call, email, video call, whatever you need, we are accessible to you. So we will now get into some of the questions and some of the challenges that you are, you know, suffering from, and we'll try to get as much of that as we can. So please keep the questions coming in. Here is my contact information. As I said, we will share the slideshow. I always joke and say that it's free to talk to me. I don't bill you hourly, so you can take advantage of reaching out, and I'm happy to talk to you about any challenges that you have and see if either we can help you or maybe I can help you find a solution within your own church. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we will, let's see if I can open up my questions here and see what I can, let's see, what do we have? Has anyone, so this would be, I don't know, this is a question that someone posed that I can't really help you with, but it would be a diocesan level question. They ask, has anyone considered an outsourced payroll program for the whole diocese? I would think the overall price would be lower for each parish. So that's something for y'all to think about. How much might we expect to pay for outsourcing the accounting? That really is case by case, determined on how many hours. We bill hourly. I'm not sure how other firms might do it. Some do flat rate fees. And it would just be based on, if we had a consultation, we would come together and talk about, your budget, what are you looking for? And then we can put together a package that fits the needs that you have. Martha, this one is for you. What does board, in quotations, reviewing board designated funds periodically look like? If you want to answer that one for us.
So I think it looks like a review of the balances and going back and reviewing to make sure that the current governing board, whether it's a finance committee or the top governing board of the congregation, that they go back and they revisit the designation to be sure that it's still relevant and that there is still a need for funds in that particular area of mission. And that's, but I, like I said, it's really a balance and a a balance review, and also a relevance review of the particular designation.
Okay.
So you need to have an accounting system that can generate those reports, which is something that is really critical. So you're not sitting there manually parsing through transactions every month to figure out what's left in any particular designation. So, but that's not hard to do. It's just a little bit of work. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I've got a question. So how are you breaking out the division of work between church staff and outsourcing? Do you outsource payroll, check cutting, bank reconciliation? How do you handle recording gifts and plate that comes in, and contribution statements? And then it says, I assume that you prepare all monthly reports. So again, this would be based on each individual church or parish, as different staff and volunteer are available. If we are able to, if there's an individual on site who would receive either the contributions from the plate or through the mail and take them to the bank, or if you guys have a remote scanner, you can do that. And then either you upload the image of the checks or you upload the report from the scanning machine, and we enter all that information into the accounting software. If you do not have an individual that can handle recording the gifts, we will do that as well, as part of you sending us that information. If you have someone on staff that can go into something like a Realm software and just go in and enter the gifts that are recorded, they would just print a report, and that's separated by the different funds that were credited, and we would credit those into the accounting system. As far as bank reconciliations, yes, we can do that. We do partner with a company called bill.com that is a very affordable option for paying bills. So that avoids the whole check cutting and running around having to chase down a senior warden or treasurer to sign checks for you. They can do it all through their phone with an approval process. So there's a whole bunch of different options we can talk about and look at. So I'm happy to, have a conversation with you. Like I said, it's free to talk to me. So I'm happy to talk to you about it and just give you an idea of what you'd be looking at. And then we can, see if the conversation can go further. I've got one here. I'm going to kick it to you, Martha, but I'm not sure that you'll fully be able to know because it's kind of a legal question, or Abigail might be able to help us with this too. Who has the oversight responsibility? From state law, it would appear to be the officers. Would they be the senior and junior wardens? In small churches which do not have good bylaws and do not mention who the officers should be, what is the liability of churches that have a somewhat informal control format?
I'm happy to respond to that generally. I am not a lawyer. I don't want to play one here by any stretch. But ultimately, it is the governing body of the entity that has fiduciary responsibility. And I think that's the most important thing in terms of this managed accounting, and there are a number of firms that do this. This is, I've had, to my friends at Chazen, I've had great experiences in a couple of different organizations, as well as with other accounting firms that do this work. This is not a substitute for the ultimate fiduciary responsibility of the governing body, not by any stretch. This is a really great suite of solutions to manage the actual accounting function. This does not in any way, nor should it, substitute for the ultimate judgment of the leaders of the lay and clergy leadership of the church, or whatever the organization happens to be. I think this gives the leaders the tools and reassurance that best practices are being followed and that the resources are being more than adequately documented. So that's a very general response, but the main point is that I think what might be behind the question is that managed accounting does not transition or oversight responsibility. That's still fundamentally in the hands of the governing body.
Okay. Go ahead, Martha.
I don't think there's a whole lot more to add. It's just that there isn't really any way for the lack of controls or the lack of bylaws to, excuse that fiduciary responsibility. So ultimately someone is expected to be able to have that. And I think that, it's if you're concerned about it, I think it would be good to, consult with some outside organization, whether it be legal or accounting, just about how you might do that in your environment with your current lack of controls or your lack of documentation of controls. So.
Martha, this next question's for you. How do you balance a parish's unique chart of accounts and standards reports versus what I assume is your standardization and best practices?
So there's no such thing as a standard chart of accounts for a church from the Chazen and Company perspective. We are advocates of what I would call manageable charts of account and what I would also call horizontal as opposed to vertical reporting. So we believe in departmentalizing reports and keeping the chart of accounts, the expense and revenue categories fairly similar across departments, and that keeps the chart of accounts under control. We've seen lots and lots of charts of accounts that, will get close to 1,000 accounts when travel is repeated 8 times for 8 different departments. So like I said, we really, and that's the easiest way to granulize your reporting also is to departmentalize your reporting. There's different terms for this. Dimensions, departments, different kinds of things. But the idea is that the different parts of the church, the different missions, they share a chart of accounts across, but they keep very careful records of what their particular department or their particular mission is taking in and expending so that you can quickly pull a report just on a particular mission area or department. So but again, like I said, we have some suggested charts of accounts, but we never shy away from an argument for why you might need more accounts because it happens. So,
thank you. There's a comment and a question that kind of have to deal with Realm ACS. So the comment is, or I guess it's a question also in the comment section, but basically understanding if outsourced accountants are familiar with ACS Realm and are they able to work with that. So that would be case by case. We are because St. Columba's works with Realm, and we have a cute couple of other churches also. And then there was another question. It's a large church with regular church operations, a nursery school, and a bookstore, and they're evaluating transitioning from QuickBooks to Realm ACS. So if you're looking to go to Realm ACS from an accounting platform, I personally do not have experience with it. I don't think, Martha, that you do either, but I'm trying to think The churches that I've spoken to that are kind of complex, and it looks like you might be, just because you're looking at 3 different areas right out the gate, have found that the ACS on demand product is a better fit for them than Realm ACS. So it might be something that you want to look into. I would suggest getting some names from Realm of churches that are about your complexity and size, and talking to them about their experience, and just kind of feeling that out before you jump into a transition. I don't know, Martha, if you've got anything you want to.
Well, whenever you're doing multi-entity accounting, you just need to be careful, because at some point you're going to need to pull it all together. So if you have essentially 3 freestanding accounting systems through three different organizations under ACS on demand or QuickBooks Online or anything like that, that's when you need to start to consider the efficiency of being able to pull that together regularly, which, typically there's the total entity, and then there's each of the separate entities, depending on whose oversight there is. So that's multi-entities is often a call for a more complex accounting system, but there are ways to do it, and it's something that I would recommend you just have somebody else, someone look at it to help you make that software choice. And like Karen says, ask them for references where you have true multi-entity accounting.
This one's another one for you, Martha. I can see the benefits of working with a firm like yours, volunteer and staff turnover. What is the turnover rate in your firm, and what is your process when a staff member who is the primary contact for a client leaves your firm?
So I can't quote you a percentage, but our turnover rate is actually very low. We, have a number of people who have been with the firm since its inception, and we've been growing and adding staff. But we have a process through document sharing and through documentation of standard operating procedures and there's always automatic redundancy. So your dedicated accountant, along with their manager, will understand your organization well and can pick up and do one another's job kind of on a daily basis. But we also have a documentation process, a very detailed narrative of how each client works, and that's the way that we are able to cover whenever there's a change, particularly if it's an unexpected change for illness or some reason like that someone can pick up that documentation and actually sit down in their chair and actually take on the responsibility. But one of the things that I do in recruiting is we focus on recruiting people who have work histories where they've stayed, because we understand that how difficult it is for a client to transition away from somebody who's really gotten in and learned the way that they do things. So the focus is on the longer term relationships with employees, and then also on documentation so that somebody can sub in when needed.
Okay, thank
May
you.
I add something here?
Yes, I was just going to say, do Abigail or Chris have any closing comments? So go for it.
So it's a great question. And I think what you're seeing from Martha is that accounting firms that do managed accounting or outsourced accounting have these systems in place to ensure that they're not dependent on one person. And that's the kind of answer you would want to hear from any firm that you're considering using. And I would also say that one of the reasons, whether it's in my volunteer life or in my professional life, when I've used managed outsourcing accounting in both instances, is that it also doesn't become your problem. That's one of the benefits, which is if the managed accounting firm loses a staff person, they move or something like that, that happens in life, but it becomes their job to ensure that there's an absolutely seamless, that there's no diminution in the services that they are providing you. And that's, I think, one of the advantages is that because in most churches, if you have one full-time accounting person, that's a lot. And so to be able to replace them when it happens, that's a really big change. And in the case where you're this becomes, whether it's Chazen's problems or Deloitte and Touche's, not that, we'd ever do that, but it becomes their problem. And you can hold their feet to the fire to say, I don't care if your person left, you still have to do my accounting. We still have a finance committee tonight, and we still have a vestry meeting on Monday. So I think it reduces the worry list, essentially, is part of what you're doing when you transition, for whatever the scope of services is. So I wanted to add that to the rationale for what some of the benefits are.
Thank you. Any other last parting words? Chris, you're muted. I don't know if you wanted to say something.
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think you heard in my story that was part of the problem is managing that turnover. And I got to tell you, I'm trying to hire a couple of people on my staff now. I mean, it's a contract administrator and a pricing analyst, and I mean, it's tough out there. It's just bananas. So, or as we said earlier in talking to Robert, it's wackadoodle. So transferring that liability or that responsibility to somebody is really helpful. It really is their problem to manage, because we have, and having gone through that myself several times, it's a real time-consuming thing. And having the continuity, again, the quality control and all that, I think it's really, really important. And it gives the congregation, back to something you said earlier, Karen, it gives the congregation, we're actually going to have our we call it a parish assembly. We do them twice a year, where we're going to present last year's numbers and where we've seen this year go. I mean, to be able to stand there and say, we have a professional CPA firm who's doing our bookkeeping, I think raises their confidence level that the funds are being managed appropriately and in accordance with the wishes. And there was one other point I was going to make about that. You mentioned, that's okay. It'll come back maybe. That's all right. It's something you said earlier, Karen, I wanted just to hone in on. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Martha, any parting words?
Oh.
Okay. Well, we want to thank you all. Oh, wait, one Q&A just popped in. Let me make sure it's not something will you please show your contact? Oh yeah, let me do that really quickly. I got to let me get my PowerPoint up. Let's see here, being technologically challenged. There you go. There's our contact information for you. And that's my cell phone number, so you can feel free to text me or call me. I'm happy to set up a time. If you email me, I can send you a Calendly link, and we can set up a time to talk whenever it's convenient for you.
I did remember what that was tying into your story, Karen, earlier. So we have our cathedral exactly as you described it. We have our administrator. He's processing checks and things like that, and we, the volunteers, are responsible for the cash. But we do a lot of transactions electronically. This was our challenge, if you might recall, transitioning over. You all helped us with a solution for that. We use a product called Faith Direct to capture a lot of transactions. That's something that Chazen really helped us out with, because that's really a big time-consuming thing. So anyway, that was our experience as well. So I just wanted to
something that I can share with the group, just so that you have a tangible example, is at St. Columba's, we have volunteers that would count the money from the Sunday offering. And there was obviously more than one individual in the room. They both signed off on the sheet. Then the sheet and the money was then handed over to myself, and I would bring in the office administrator person who works in the front office, just to verify, make sure everything's good. I was a banker in a prior life, so I don't like to just have cash one time in my possession without someone seeing that I know what it is and confirming that it's right. And then wrap it all up. I would put all those gifts into Realm. Also process all the checks, any of the mail that came in, I would process twice a week through Realm on the contribution side, produce the reports, and then give those to the accountants to be able to enter into the system. And then every month, the Realm donor database, the gifts that are made in that are then reconciled to the accounting software to ensure that that everything balances, and then I'm not doing anything funny with the contribution side. So, and then when we sent out quarterly statements, the name that they would contact to make any corrections to the statement would be someone other than myself, since I was the one putting in the donations. And so that way, again, I couldn't, you know, say that I gave so-and-so money and take the money myself and do something else with it, or not post it, and so that I could walk away with the cash. So that's kind of the checks and balances. So that's how we did it. And all of the expenses are paid. We you know, with Martha's help, set up bill.com, and all the invoices got uploaded into bill.com and coded. And then I would just go in, review the different invoices, the coding, approve them. And then the Chazen accountant went in and actually hit the submit button to release the payment. So we didn't really do checks. Understanding that in church world at Easter and Christmas, you do have sometimes musicians and they want to be paid that day when they play. So we would have some, you know, paper checks that we would have to issue, but in general, we tried to do most of it electronically. So I think I'm gonna, with my screen share, I'm gonna pop this up. Yep. Okay, so I think we've answered all the questions that are out there. And we thank you all for your time today and for, you know, taking time to listen to us and our story. And as I mentioned, we're here for you, and feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to have a conversation with you and see if there's anything we can do to help you. It's an incredibly important thing to have your finances and accounting in order, especially in a church where you are paid by those that make donations. So it's good to be good stewards of that. So I thank you again for joining us. And if you have anything else, let us know. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.